Hi there, I'm John McAdams, founder of the Big Game Hunting blog. And in this video, I'm going to do a detailed comparison of the 270 Winchester and 7mm Remington Magnum cartridges. Now, both are effective and useful cartridges with dedicated fan bases, and there's definitely a good bit of overlap in their capabilities. But you'll learn here shortly that there's also a divergence in what each cartridge is best suited for. So in this episode, I investigate the 270 versus the 7mm Rem Mag debate in detail, and I'll provide some insight into which cartridge is better suited for common hunting situations so you can make an informed decision on which one will work best for your individual needs. Before we get started, make sure you're on my email list. To do that, click that link below or go to huntingguns101.com. Once you get there, sign up for my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges. You'll get my free ebook when you do that, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. These are entertaining and informative emails about hunting, shooting, ballistics, etc. And I get feedback all the time from people telling me how much they enjoy receiving them and how much they look forward to hearing from me every day. So make sure you are getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com or, like I said, by clicking that link in the video description below. Okay, let's get started talking about the 270 and the 7mm Rem Mag, and as usual, we'll start with the history of these two cartridges. Now, the story of the 270 and the 7mm Remington Magnum both start with the 30-06 Springfield. The United States Army started looking for a new infantry service rifle and cartridge after receiving a deadly demonstration of the capabilities of the revolutionary new Mauser rifle and 7mm Mauser cartridge in the hands of Spanish troops in Cuba during 1898. They eventually selected the bolt-action 1903 Springfield rifle chambered in the new 30-06 Springfield cartridge to replace the older Springfield Model 1892, better known as the Krag-Jorgensen rifle, which was chambered in the 30-40 Krag cartridge. Now, the new 30-06 was dimensionally similar to the 7x57mm Mauser, and it's highly likely that the designers of the 30-06 based their cartridge design heavily on the revolutionary 7mm Mauser cartridge. Now, some have even gone so far as to say that the 7mm Mauser is the parent to the less well-known 30-03 Springfield, from which the legendary 30-06 Springfield is descended. Anyway, initial loadings for that cartridge used smokeless powder to fire a 150 grain Spitzer bullet at about 2,700 feet per second. Believe it or not, that was a massive leap forward in performance compared to other popular American cartridges used during that era, like the 4570 and to a lesser extent the 3040 Krag. And just for reference, the 3040 Krag fired a 220 grain bullet at about 2,000 feet per second. So, dropping down to a 150 grain Spitzer bullet instead of a 220 grain round nose bullet and pushing it at 2,700 feet per second instead of 2,000 feet per second was a big leap forward. And as you can imagine, the 30-06 was a big hit with the military, and it was also an almost instant hit in the civilian market as well. Now, as is often the case with any well-designed centerfire rifle cartridge, wildcatters almost immediately started modifying the 30-06 to accomplish a variety of different tasks. Some designers necked the 30-06 case down to use smaller diameter bullets, which was the case, say, with the 25-06 and 280 Remington cartridges. And this is what the folks at Winchester did when they modified the case to use smaller .277 caliber instead of .308 caliber bullets. The result was the 270 Winchester cartridge, which Winchester released in 1925 with their new Winchester Model 54 rifle. The original 270 Winchester offerings shot a 130 grain bullet at a velocity of 3,140 feet per second. This was an incredibly high velocity for the 1920s, and it was a tremendous speed improvement over the 30-06, which was itself a pretty high velocity cartridge at the time. Now, subsequent factory loadings for the cartridge have dropped the typical velocity with 130 grain bullets down to about 3,060 feet per second, which is still a pretty high velocity loading even today, really. Now, American hunters appreciated the flat shooting characteristics of the round, as well as the fact that it was so effective on thin-skinned game. The cartridge gradually became more and more popular, which was helped by Jack O'Connor and his famous affinity for the cartridge that he expressed in countless outdoor life articles over the years. Now, while O'Connor did indeed love the 270 and used it extensively on hunts all over the world, it was far from the only cartridge he used. And indeed, the 270 was probably also a good enough cartridge and filled a big enough niche that it probably would have been successful even without help from Jack O'Connor. But, every little bit helps with that sort of stuff. And it's always an interesting fact about both O'Connor and the cartridge that they are so strongly linked together. Now, the 270 is a bit of an oddity when it comes to bullet diameter, though. Now, unlike all the other popular 7mm cartridges, like the 7mm Mauser, 7mm 08, 7mm Remington Magnum, the 280 Remington, the 280 Ackley Improved, the 28 Nosler, all of those cartridges use .284 caliber bullets. Well, the 270 Winchester uses slightly smaller .277 caliber bullets. It's unclear exactly why designers at Winchester decided to go with the .277 caliber instead of .284 caliber bullets with the 270. One theory is that they selected that particular bullet size based on the obscure 6.8 by 57 millimeter Chinese Mauser cartridge. It's also possible that the folks at Winchester wanted to create a distinctly American bullet size and avoid the 6.5 millimeter and 7 millimeter bullets popular in Europe by building a brand new bullet diameter that is exactly 10% smaller than the one used in the 30-06. 0.9 multiplied by 0.308 is 0.277. Now, regardless of their exact reasons, the design team at Winchester went with the .277 caliber bullet diameter, and the rest is history. Now, interestingly enough, while the .270 Winchester cartridge turned out to be a smashing commercial success for the company, .277 caliber bullets haven't really caught on themselves otherwise. You have the .270 Winchester Short Mag and the .270 Weatherby, along with the newer 6.8 Remington SPC, the 27 Nosler, and the 6.8 Western. All of those cartridges use .277 caliber bullets themselves, but they're the only other cartridges that utilize bullets of that size. And if you think of all of the cartridges that have come and gone since 1925, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cartridges that I just listed, that's a pretty small sample size. But even so, the .270 Winchester remains incredibly popular and also a very effective big game hunting cartridge all over the world, regardless of its somewhat unusual bullet diameter. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about the 7mm Remington Magnum. Now, the years following World War II were a true renaissance of civilian firearm and cartridge development in the United States. That time period saw a flood of new centerfire rifle cartridges like the .223, the .243, and the .308. That same general time period also saw the start of the modern quote-unquote Magnum era when Winchester introduced a line of new belted Magnum cartridges that utilized a modified .375 Holland & Holland Magnum case. They introduced the .458 Winchester Magnum first in 1956, then the .264 Winchester Magnum and the .338 Winchester Magnum during the next couple of years. All of those cartridges utilized a .375 H&H case necked down or up in the case of the .458 Win Mag, and shortened from 2.85 inches to 2.5 inches long. The designers used these shortened cases so that all of those new cartridges would fit in a standard length rifle action, which is the same as the .270 and the 30-06 Springfield, instead of the longer Magnum length action required by the original .375 Holland & Holland Magnum cartridge. Now, Remington took a page out of Winchester's playbook, and they rolled out their own belted Magnum cartridge in 1962, which was also based on the .375. We know that cartridge now as the 7mm Remington Magnum. Once again, used the same neck down and shortened .375 H&H case, and in this case, they necked it down to use .284 caliber bullets. Now, the 30-06 was and remains the gold standard by which most similar cartridges are judged. Well, the use of a larger case based on the belted .375 H&H, along with the use of smaller diameter .284 caliber bullets by the 7mm Remington Magnum, resulted in a significant ballistic improvement over the 30-06. Indeed, the 7mm Rem Mag will shoot the same weight bullet faster than the 30-06. And the narrower .284 caliber bullets the 7 Mag uses have a higher ballistic coefficient and more sectional density than 30 caliber bullets of the same weight used by the 30-06 and other 30 caliber cartridges. So for these reasons, typical 7mm Rem Mag loads have a flatter trajectory, they retain more energy downrange, and all other things equal, they will penetrate better than 30-06 Springfield loads using the same weight bullets. The 7mm Remington Magnum also fit in a standard linked rifle action, just like the 30-06. And to top it all off, the new 7 Mag was rolled out at the same time as the now legendary Remington Model 700 rifle. So American hunters and shooters were immediately offered the chance to use a new high-performance cartridge that was available in a well-built, reasonably priced, and potentially very accurate new rifle. With all that in mind, it's not surprising at all that the flat-shooting and hard-hitting 7mm Rem Mag quickly caught on with hunters and shooters in North America, and the 7 Mag remains incredibly popular among hunters to this day. And as a quick aside, I thought it was very interesting here that both the 270 and the 7 Rem Mag were introduced at the same time as a new rifle from Winchester and Remington, respectively. Now, the Remington 700 is still around, still in production. It's a great rifle. That's not the case with the Winchester Model 54. It was a very well-received rifle at the time. It's known as the quote-unquote rifleman's rifle. It was replaced by the Winchester Model 70, so even though the Model 54 itself is not around anymore, the Model 70 is descended from it, and like I said, the 54 was an excellent rifle at the time. So I just thought that was interesting that both of these cartridges that became so popular were also introduced at the same time as a really well-received rifle. Okay, anyway, let's talk about cartridge sizes for the 270 and the 7 Rem Mag. So first thing, the 7 Rem Mag is physically larger than the 270. Now, the 270 does have a slightly greater maximum authorized overall length of 3.34 inches versus 3.29 inches. And it has a little bit longer case of 2.54 inches versus 2.5 inches. Both cartridges are close enough in size that they fit in a standard or a long-action rifle. However, the 7 Rem Mag has a larger 0.532 inch rim diameter, while the 270 has a 0.473 inch rim diameter. Now, the 7 Rem Mag also has a steeper 25-degree shoulder, and the 270 has a 17.5-degree shoulder. And the shoulder on the 7 Rem Mag also sits a little bit farther forward than the one on the 270. So the end result is the 7 Rem Mag does have a significantly larger case capacity than the 270. Bullet size and bullet weight are also other important differences. 270 uses .277 caliber bullets, while the 7 Rem Mag uses a little bit larger .284 caliber bullets. The vast majority of 270 factory loads shoot bullets in the 130 to 160 grain range. 130 and 150 grain bullets are the most popular there. The 7 Rem Mag shoots a little bit wider range of bullet weights, say 139 grains on the low end to 175 grains on the upper end, at least with common factory loads. 140, 150, 160, and 175 grain loads are more common for that cartridge. Now, interestingly, the 270 is loaded to a higher SAMI maximum average pressure of 65,000 psi versus just 61,000 psi for the 7 Rem Mag. Now, the differences in their external dimensions do translate into some pretty stark differences in their ballistic performance. So this is illustrated when you compare Hornady Precision Hunter, Nosler Trophy Grade, and Winchester Deer Season XP factory ammunition for both cartridges. The 270 Winchester loads use 130 grain Extreme Point with a .450 BC, 145 grain ELDX with a .536 BC, and 150 grain Partition bullets with a .465 BC. The 7 Rem Mag uses 140 grain Extreme Point with a .484 BC, 162 grain ELDX with a .631 BC, and 160 grain Partition with a .475 BC. Now, the Winchester loads use light for caliber deer hunting bullets. The Hornady loads use heavier for caliber and exceptionally aerodynamic bullets with a very high BC. And the Nosler loads use some of the heaviest for caliber bullets that are commonly available for each cartridge in factory loads. Now, before I go into the details of comparing ballistics in these cartridges, I want to point out that the various bullets used in those 7mm loads all have a higher BC than those used in comparable 270 Winchester loads. Going back to the point that I made earlier about things usually topping out around 150 grains for the 270, that's because of the, due in large part anyway, to the rifling twist rate used by that cartridge. The 1 in 10 inch rifling twist rate, pretty standard with the 270, means that cartridge has a hard time stabilizing bullets that are very long and sleek, like that ELDX, for instance, that are heavier than 150 grains. There is a little bit of a push that we're seeing now as I record this to use a 270, or rather for manufacturers to produce 270 rifles with a little bit faster rifling twist rate. That is the case with the 27 Nosler and the 6.8 Western, right? They're not the same as the 270, but they use faster rifling twist weights, so they use that same diameter bullet, and they can use heavier and more aerodynamic bullets, like say that 165 grain Accubon long range from Nosler. So it is possible that we could see some changes on this front in the future, and we might see 270 Winchester loads using things that are heavier than 150 grains, that are real high BC. But as I record this right now, that is kind of how things stand, and that is a big part of the reason why, like I said, things top out normally around 150 grains for the 270. Okay, so let's get into the details of how those different loads compare to each other. Now, the 7mm Remington Magnum does have a flatter trajectory and more kinetic energy than comparable 270 Winchester loads at all ranges. This is due to the fact that the 7mm Remington Magnum has either similar or a slightly higher muzzle velocity than the 270 when firing heavier bullets. Additionally, since it uses more aerodynamic bullets with a higher ballistic coefficient, that gap in performance grows in favor of the 7mm mag as range increases. The details matter here, though, and there's a bit of overlap with their performance. Every 7mm Remington Magnum load in this comparison has a little bit more muzzle energy and a little bit flatter trajectory than the comparable 270 Winchester load with the same bullet. However, that 270 load firing the really high BC 145 ELDX bullet actually has a flatter trajectory and more retained energy than the 7mm Rem Mag load with the 160 grain partition. Now, while the 7mm Rem Mag Deer Season XP load has a tiny bit flatter trajectory than the 145 grain ELDX, that cartridge, that load from the 270 does have more retained energy at 200 to 500 yards as well. So here's how each 7mm Rem Mag load compares individually to the comparable 270 Winchester load in terms of muzzle energy, retained energy at 500 yards, and bullet drop at 500 yards. Deer Season XP. The 7mm Rem Mag has 10% more muzzle energy, 17.6% more kinetic energy at 500 yards, and 0.7 inches, or 1.8% less bullet drop at 500 yards. Hornady Precision Hunter. 7mm Rem Mag has 9.5% more muzzle energy, 21% more kinetic energy at 500 yards, and 1.1 inch, or 3% less bullet drop at 500 yards. Nosler Trophy Grade. 7mm Rem Mag has 18.4% more muzzle energy, 22.6% more kinetic energy at 500 yards, and 5.4 inches, or 13.5% less bullet drop at 500 yards. So with all that in mind, it's pretty clear the 7mm Rem Mag is both more powerful and flatter shooting than the 270. That's not surprising, right? We're comparing a more modern Magnum cartridge in the 7mm Rem Mag to an older, quote-unquote, standard class centerfire rifle cartridge in the 270. But interestingly, though, the 270 is also still a really flat shooting cartridge. The 7 Mag is a little bit flatter shooting, but it's kind of right there with it. But the 7 Rem Mag does have a much bigger advantage in terms of kinetic energy. Additionally, all the loads in this comparison also easily maintain at least 1,000 foot-pounds of energy out past 500 yards. That 162 ELDX load from the 7 Mag has well in excess of 1,500 foot-pounds of energy out past 500, and still has over 2,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy at 400 yards, and the 140 and 160 grain 7 Rem Mag loads maintain at least 1,500 foot-pounds of kinetic energy out to 400 yards, and they drop below 1,500 foot-pounds of energy just shy of 500 yards. That 145 grain 270 load carries 1,500 foot-pounds of kinetic energy out past 400 yards, while the other two loads for that cartridge dip below that threshold just shy of 400 yards. So the big takeaways so far are the 7 Rem Mag has a small advantage in terms of flatter trajectory and a bigger advantage in terms of kinetic energy at all ranges, and that advantage increases as range increases. Now let's talk about wind deflection. Once again, the 7 Rem Mag also has the advantage in this area. Now this makes sense because once again, we're shooting a cartridge that uses more aerodynamic bullets at a higher velocity. Once again, exact details vary. Overall, the 7 Rem Mag has an advantage ranging from 16 to 53% less wind deflection at 500 yards. So here's the breakdown by loading for wind drift at 300 yards and 500 yards. Deer season, 270 has 0.6 inches or 10.7% more wind deflection at 300 yards and 1.8 inches or 10.8% more wind deflection at 500 yards. Hornady Precision Hunter, 270 has 0.8 inches or 17.7% more wind deflection at 300 yards and 2.4 inches or 18.1% more wind deflection at 500 yards. Nosler Trophy Grade, the 270 has 0.7 inches or 11.4% more wind deflection at 300 yards and 2 inches or 10.9% more wind deflection at 500 yards. So once again, 7 Rem Mag does have an advantage here. So yeah, I'd rather have a cartridge that has less wind deflection, but we're not talking like the 7 Rem Mag has like a foot less wind deflection or something like that. Advantage, not a giant one. Now let's talk about recoil. Now when you compare the recoil produced by hand loads, approximating the performance of the Hornady factory loads, firing those ELDX bullets when you use them in identical 7-pound rifles, you see the 7 Rem Mag has about 29% more recoil than the 270. Now this is where the 7 Rem Mag users really pay the piper, quote unquote, for the benefits that cartridge offers in terms of wind deflection, kinetic energy, and trajectory. Now the 7 Rem Mag isn't that hard of a recoiling cartridge, and it's known as one of the lighter recoiling, quote unquote, Magnum cartridges, and many hunters are able to handle it without serious trouble. It's just the 270 has even less recoil, and it does have an advantage in this respect, especially for those that just struggle with recoil a little bit. Okay, let's talk about a couple of other factors. First, I've mentioned it before, but the 7 Rem Mag does use larger diameter bullets. So specifically, those larger diameter .284 caliber bullets have about 5% more frontal surface area than the .277 caliber bullets used by the 270 Winchester. All other things being equal, bigger bullet will make a bigger hole, cause more tissue damage, and result in more blood loss on a game animal. Small advantage in favor of the 7 Rem Mag, especially on bigger game. But especially when you combine that with the fact that the 7 Rem Mag carries more kinetic energy downrange, those larger diameter bullets can be helpful when hunting bigger game, especially stuff like elk, moose, etc. It also has a slight edge over the 270 in bullet sectional density. Now, all other things being equal, a heavier bullet of a given caliber will be longer and have a higher sectional density and consequently penetrate deeper than projectiles with a lower mass and lower sectional density. As an example, 130 grain, 140 grain, and 150 grain .277 caliber bullets have sectional densities of .242, .261, and .279. Compare that to 140, 150, and 160 grain .284 caliber bullets, which have sectional densities of .248, .266, and .283. The differences are small across the board, but when comparing the most popular bullet weights for each cartridge, like that 140 grain bullet for the 7 Rem Mag and a 130 grain bullet for a 270, etc., the 7 Rem Mag does have a small edge. This also applies to ballistic coefficient. The bullets used in this comparison illustrate those differences well, with all of the 7 Rem Mag bullets slightly outclassing those used by the 270. All right, so where do we stand with each cartridge? The 7 Rem Mag fires a larger diameter, usually heavier, and usually more aerodynamic bullet at a slightly faster velocity than the 270. For this reason, the 7 Rem Mag usually has a flatter trajectory, more retained kinetic energy, but more recoil than the 270. Now, in terms of ammo, both are extremely popular among hunters and shooters all over the world. Both, though almost certainly the 270, are also likely in the top 10 most popular centerfire cartridges in the United States. Now, while the 7 Rem Mag is very popular itself, the 270 is probably the more widely used of the two, but that's not to say the 7 Rem Mag is rare. Almost every big ammunition manufacturer makes ammo for both cartridges, and you can find both cartridges in almost every really popular hunting ammo line. All right, Barnes Vortex, Federal Terminal Ascent, Power Shock, Hornady Precision Hunter, Nosler Trophy Grade, Remington Core Lock, Winchester Super X, etc. Now, while it's usually very easy to find a variety of ammo for both cartridges during normal times, ammo is usually a little easier to find, and there will generally be a larger selection to choose from for the 270. And 270 Winchester ammo is usually a little less expensive. You will see oftentimes some regional variation in terms of availability and pricing for both, but just taken across the aggregate in the United States, 270 is going to be a little easier to find and a little bit less expensive. During the 2020 to 2023 ammo shortage, the difference between the two has become even more apparent, and at least where I live and shop, the 270 Winchester is usually easier and cheaper in terms of easier to find and less expensive in terms of ammo. The case is similar with rifles, and once again, the 270 is usually a little bit more common than the 7 Rem Mag, but there's usually a good selection of rifles chambered in both. They're both really common in most of the really popular bolt-action rifles, and in fact, I'd say that just about every really popular bolt-action hunting rifle in current production is available in 270 and 7 Rem Mag. Right, for instance, you can get them both in the Remington 700, the Winchester Model 70, the Browning X-Bolt, Christensen Arms Mesa, Mossberg Patriot, the Ruger Hawkeye, Savage Axis, etc. Now, both cartridges are also available in a few lever action and semi-automatic rifles as well, like the Browning automatic rifle and the Browning lever action rifle. And here's another interesting thing that you need to keep in mind as well. Barrel lengths do vary for both cartridges depending on the manufacturer and exact model. 270 is most common in rifles with a 22-inch barrel, but it's not unusual to see it with a longer 24-inch barrel. On the other hand, Magnum cartridges like the 7 Rem Mag tend to have longer barrels. That's because they need a longer barrel to effectively and efficiently burn that larger powder charge. For this reason, 24-inch and even 26-inch barrels are more typical for the 7 Rem Mag. So for instance, I'll use the Winchester Model 70 Super Grade to illustrate this point. It's available in both cartridges. With the 270, it has a 24-inch long barrel, it's 44.75 inches long overall, and it weighs 8 pounds 4 ounces. The 7 Rem Mag has a 26-inch long barrel, is 46.75 inches long overall, and it weighs 8 pounds 8 ounces. So like I said, the details do vary, but you're going to see oftentimes rifles chambered in 270, especially those with a 22-inch barrel, are going to be shorter, lighter, handier, more easy to maneuver than rifles chambered in 7 Rem Mag. Sometimes that's more important on a hunt than at other times, so just keep that in mind. We'll talk about that here again in a second. Okay, so which one is right for you? Do you primarily hunt medium-sized game like whitetail deer and feral hogs at ranges within 200 yards? Both the 270 and the 7mm Rem Mag are outstanding deer hunting cartridges, and they'll work great on deer-sized game with good shot placement. The 270 in particular is nothing if not a great deer hunting cartridge, and it remains one of the most popular North American hunting cartridges in general. There's nothing wrong with using the 7 Rem Mag on deer inside 200 yards, but it's really more than you need for that sort of work, and it's also just rougher on both your shoulder and your wallet. Additionally, if you're going to be hunting in the tight confines of a deer stand or in thick brush, remember what I just talked about in terms of the size differences in those rifles. That couple extra inches in overall length can be a real headache to deal with when you're trying to quickly and quietly maneuver for a shot. So definitely consider the 270 if you prefer a more compact rifle. In general, I would recommend the 270 for someone who is primarily interested in hunting deer. But are you looking for a cartridge better suited for longer range hunting for game like mule deer, pronghorn, or potentially even whitetail in more open country where you might need to take a shot at a longer range? Once again, both work really well here overall. That flat shooting 270 shines in this area compared to a lot of other cartridges, but the 7 Rem Mag is one of the few that outclasses the 270 in this area. Not a darn thing wrong with using the 270 on an open country hunt, but those open country mule deer and pronghorn hunts often have more windy conditions as well. So this gives the 7 Rem Mag an edge here, especially when you're using high BC wind bucking bullets. What about if you want a hunting cartridge that's better suited for bigger game, black bear, caribou, moose, elk, eland, kudu, etc.? The 270 is a fantastic choice for use on bigger game, and once again, not a darn thing wrong with using it on one of those hunts. In fact, I would say the 270 is probably the smallest quote-unquote serious elk cartridge. Of these two cartridges, though, I'd probably lean towards the 7 Rem Mag because it uses larger diameter and heavier bullets with a bigger sectional density that tend to penetrate better. Loaded with something like a quality 160 grain partition or A-frame, 168 grain Accubon long range, or 150 to 160 grain lead-free bullet like the Barnes TSX or TTSX, the 7 Rem Mag is a fantastic choice for use on really big game at reasonable range. It's not often counted among the real heavy hitters, but the 270 can be darn effective in this role at shorter range when using heavy for caliber controlled expansion bullets, like 150 grain Nosler partition, for instance. Now, lots of hunters have killed untold numbers of elk and moose, etc. with a 270. And if anything, the 270 is even more effective on really large game now than it was 20, 30 years ago, just because we have access to much better quality bullets these days. So for instance, I have a friend that used a 150 grain Nosler partition to kill a lot of game very cleanly in Africa, kudu, blue wildebeest, zebra, etc. One shot kills on everything, and it worked great. So that's not to say that you can't do it, but I would say that of these two cartridges, I would say the 270 is probably the better choice for someone who exclusively or primarily hunts for deer, and they might want to hunt Africa or maybe go hunt elk once or twice in their life. On the other hand, I think the 7 Rem Mag is a better option for someone who's going to be doing a lot of elk hunting or moose hunting or going to Africa several times. So, that's kind of how I divide them up there. Okay, what if we take things up a notch and we're hunting brown or grizzly bear? Or what if you're hunting like in Canada or Alaska and you would like a heavier hitting cartridge just in case you find yourself on the wrong end of a big bear attack, right? You're hunting moose in Canada or Alaska, you get your moose down, and then you get a bear that wants to take that kill away from you and attack you in the process. Neither cartridge would be my first choice for use on one of those hunts, but they will definitely work in a pinch, and of these two, I would go with the 7 Rem Mag since it uses larger diameter and heavier bullets. Make sure that you use premium, heavy for caliber, 160 grain or heavier bullets if you go that route. And this is a case where if you might have an encounter with the bear when you're out there, I would go as heavy as I can get to use on my moose or whatever I'm out there hunting, just to have that in case I run into a bear. Now let's talk about recoil. What if you need a lower recoil in cartridge for whatever reason? Neither has terrible recoil, but the 270 has a big advantage over the 7 Rem Mag here. Now, I wouldn't probably recommend the 270 for a very recoil-shy hunter. Instead, I'd point them to something like a 6.5 Creedmoor or a 7mm 08 Remington. But of these two, 7 Rem Mag has more recoil than the 270, so I'd point people to the 270. What about if you're looking for a great cartridge for sheep, mountain goat, or tahr hunting, where you need an effective cartridge with manageable recoil and a lightweight and easy to carry rifle? Both will certainly work here, but thanks to Jack O'Connor, the 270 is considered a classic sheep hunting cartridge if there ever was one. Even so, I'd give the 7 Rem Mag an edge here because it has the flattest trajectory, the most resistance to wind drift, and the most retained energy at extended range when using ideal bullets. But that's not to say the 270 is a bad choice. I just think the 7 Rem Mag is better. Now, as I've stated many times here, right, the 7 Rem Mag and the 270 are both solid rifle cartridges. And there is a good amount of overlap in their performance in ideal uses, but like I just went over, there's some significant differences between their performance in certain respects, and I would point hunters to one cartridge over the other in those specific situations that I just covered. What you got to do is you have to carefully evaluate your needs as a hunter based on the circumstances you foresee using that cartridge in. Get a good hunting rifle chambered in the cartridge you select, learn to shoot it well, use good bullets, and it should serve you well afield. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel right now. Just click that red subscribe button below to make sure you don't miss out on any of my other new videos on hunting gear reviews, cartridge comparisons, and more. Now, for more detailed information on popular hunting cartridges and what they're best suited for, to include the 270 and the 7 Rem Mag, but some others as well, click that link in the description below or go to huntingguns101.com to get a free ebook I have written on the best hunting cartridges. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to you. Which cartridge do you prefer of these two? The 270 or the 7mm Remington Magnum? What game have you successfully taken with each one? let me know by leaving a comment on this video right now. And also feel free to leave a comment with requests for other cartridge comparisons you would like to see in the future. I did this one because someone specifically requested it. If I get a lot of requests for a good comparison, I'll definitely add that to my list of things I'll do in the future. So thanks for watching. Have a great day and good hunting.